Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hey, friend, and welcome to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Esther Littlefield, and I'm back this month with Holly Kane. Hey, Holly.
Hey.
You want to share what we're going to talk about today?
Yes, we are going to talk about networking and building relationships. So, we talked about this in a previous episode last month when we were talking about going to events, but networking's like a scary term. Like it freaks me out, right? So we're going to break it down.
Yeah.
And we're going to make it less scary, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm going to choose not to use the word network.
Okay.
In my own brain.
Yes.
I'm just going to call it building relationships.
Right.
Does that work for you?
It works. It works
Okay.
for me. And I think, we're talking about this because no matter what kind of leadership role you have, you need to build relationships, right? Like that's a huge part of being a leader is relationships.
Yeah.
And so we're going to do this episode kind of similar to how we did the last one about events. We're going to break it down into some categories. So we're going to start just by shifting our perspective about networking, which you already kind of led us into. We're also going to talk about what to do in the event or the virtual room, because this can happen in real life, in person, and it can also happen online. For many of us, especially in the past few years, the online networking stuff has expanded a lot, even more than what we did before. And then we're going to talk more specifically about what to do when someone asks about you. So there we go.
Okay. Before we start, I'm going to ask you a question. You may not have an answer because I didn't prep you with this. Are you ready?
No, I have no idea what you're going to say.
Can you think back of any like cringy networking things that you've ever done, or where you just bombed?
Oh man.
We might as well just get it right off the top of the episode.
It's hard to pick just one. But I know that when I was in my early days of network marketing, I think that was probably when I was the clumsiest.
Okay.
As it relates to networking. So I definitely started attending a women's networking group locally when I was in a network marketing company. And so I think I don't have a very cringy story to tell.
Okay.
I wish I did. But I'm sure I did some cringy things. And I'm sure that some of what we're going to share today is the things that I have learned not to do based on the ways that those things happened. But I do have an example of something that somebody else did.
Oh, so you're going to throw somebody else under the bus. Okay.
I'm not going to name any names, but I was at an event recently and I went to, not really recently, just in the past year, I was at an event. Could be very vague about this. And I went to a meal with another person. And I was, just sitting with her and asking her questions and trying to get to know her more. And literally during our conversation, she asked me 0 questions about myself or what I do. She just gave me her answers and then it would just be silent or she would just talk about something else. But there was no reciprocation of the effort of
That's
getting to know. It was very uncomfortable. And so that's one of the things we'll talk about here in a minute. But, it was very obvious that she didn't really care to get to know me. Like we
Oh,
were just sort of having a meal together, but it just felt awkward. So
yeah. Weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, hopefully after this episode, our listeners will not do that.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So let's start with the shifting the perspective, because this is kind of like my soapbox that I get on.
Yes. Go for it.
I'm going to go for it. Okay.
Yep.
So as we have already stated, networking is about building relationships with other people. And I've said this too, but building relationships as a leader is one of the most important things you can do. Oftentimes, these relationships that you build can lead to opportunities, to other connections, to things that you really can't even predict at the time that you are investing in the relationships. And so, just to give a little analogy, networking, I think, is similar to making connections at a party. So, pretend you've had this experience. You recently moved. I'm in the middle of a move. So let's say I go and I move and my neighbor invites me to a Christmas party. And I don't really know people in the neighborhood. And so I go to the party just to kind of try to get to know people and meet people in the area. I wouldn't walk into the room at that Christmas party and just like go through the door and announce who I am loudly and tell everybody why they should want to get to know me, whether it's, hey, I host a podcast, or hey, I work here, or hey, I have this thing that I do on the side. And then I also wouldn't go into the room and go around into the little conversations with different people and only talk about myself the whole time. Right? Like, that would be awkward and weird. But somehow we forget that when we're networking at business events or even ministry events or things like that. And sometimes we get a little confused about what the point of this networking is. And we start to think, okay, what am I going to get out of this? I'm going to this thing. So what can I get out of this? Or how can I find my next customer? Or how can I find my next podcast listener or person that would read my book? Right. And I go in with this like agenda to try and get somebody, right? Like, I'm going to get this person and I'm going to get them to do the thing that I want them to do.
Right.
Instead of going in and saying, how can I get to know these people? How can I offer value? How can I build a relationship? Just like I would build a relationship with a neighbor or coworker or friend. Yep. So shifting that perspective, I feel like if we can just kind of remember that, like, when you go into a Facebook group online, pretend you're going to a Christmas party and you don't go into the group. And the first thing you do is post in the group about your latest accomplishment or project or book or whatever you're selling. Likewise, in an in-person networking scenario, you want to go into it with the perspective of, I'm here to build relationships. I'm here to see if I can serve people in this room, provide value. And through that, you are going to get business. If you're in business, you are going to make connections. You are going to build collaborations with people, but you need to make sure you have the correct motivation. Yeah. So that's my soapbox about building relationships.
Okay. Well, so I have to admit that, like, whenever I have tried to work on networking, a lot of the strategies are about what you say about yourself or what you say to someone, because obviously you can only control your side of the conversation, right? Right. And so it makes it very inward focused. And so I think that when you get caught up in those strategies, you do forget to make it about the other person. And I think when we are not genuine in our curiosity about people, when we're just asking the question as part of a formula, people can tell. And the last thing that you want to do is lead with being, what's the word? Disingenuous, not genuine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like not being authentic. And so that's probably the worst way to build a relationship, is just to be like, hey, what's your biggest pain point right now? You know what I mean? Like, that's not how you go about that. Right. So I think that shifting the perspective, like what you're talking about, is shifting it to, what can I offer? How can I learn about them? And I think for me, when we talk about this, when I think about sales, specifically in business, I had to switch my thinking from getting something from someone to sales is service. I'm providing a service, and what I do benefits other people. And so it's helpful for me to tell them about what I do because they might need my help.
Yeah.
Not I'm trying to get their money. Like,
right. Right. Yeah. And I think that the thing, I just want to hit on this for a minute before we dive into kind of some of the practical tips, is especially because I know that a lot of our listeners have passion projects, and you might be listening and you have launched a podcast, or you are writing a book, or you have a blog or a YouTube channel, or something that you're doing that may or may not be a business, but it's something you are really excited about, right?
Yeah.
And rightfully so, because you're putting in time and energy and you're serving with your gifts and you're showing up and you're doing the hard work. And so sometimes what happens is people will just, as an example, I've had people come into our Facebook group, the Purposeful Leadership Facebook group, and they will post about their thing that they are passionate about. And we have a guideline in the group that is no self-promotion. Like, you're not allowed to post your stuff in the group as promotion. And people take offense to that because they feel like, but I am just here to serve people. I just want to share what I'm doing because it's going to help other people. If that's you and you felt shut down by other situations that maybe haven't allowed you to share, things like that, is that, again, you've got to find a way to shift your perspective that, yes, you are there to serve. Yes, you are there to help people in some way with the thing you're doing, but it's about how you approach it. And so if you go into a Facebook group and you go and you are providing value and commenting and responding to other people's comments and responding in a way that shows your passion, shows your expertise for the area that you have expertise in, then those people are going to be interested in connecting with you and following you, and probably will find your podcast if you have it linked up on your personal Facebook or something like that, much more effectively than when you go in and just post it and drop in, what is it? Post and run. Like,
yeah,
you post it and then you just leave, because people can sense when you're just there to get something out of it for yourself. And again, even though you are serving people, like same thing with Holly and I mean, we're doing this podcast. We are hopefully serving you.
Yeah.
But we're not going to go into other people's Facebook groups and just post about this podcast all day long, because we haven't taken the time to build relationships with those people. We haven't taken time to get to know them. So all that to say, when you have that perspective of, yes, I am serving people, I am here to share something that could benefit them, you also need to try to look at it from the other person's perspective and say, that could still be seen as self-promotion if you're just posting about your thing and not necessarily thinking about how that's going to come across to the group in the room. Just like if I were to walk into that Christmas party and say, hey, everybody, you should check out my podcast. It's super awesome.
Right. Okay. I'm going to flip the script on this, because a lot of things we're talking about is an event or a virtual room or like when you're talking to someone. Okay.
Yes.
And it seems to be in a very like professional, even if it's ministry, like a professional setting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But how do you think this relates to evangelism? Okay. So as you're talking about this, I'm literally thinking about sort of these evangelistic formulas that are out there, and people just come full force with them, and they're asking questions to get a certain response.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling very conflicted when I'm thinking about this, because obviously the goal of evangelism is to share the gospel.
Yeah.
And the gospel is the best news. But I am so much more of a relationship builder when it comes to that. So I guess I don't know what my question is, but how do you think this relates to evangelism and sharing the gospel with people? And it's so not in our notes, but my brain
so
was
not in our notes.
Couldn't.
I love it, because I have been thinking about doing an episode about this.
Okay, good.
About how marketing, apologetics, and leadership are all intertwined.
Yes.
Okay. And the way I think this relates to evangelism is that, in my opinion, okay, as a non-evangelism expert,
right,
is that just like there's a lot of different networking strategies and tactics, there's a lot of different strategies and approaches and philosophies around evangelism. But ultimately, it's about the other person, where they are at and what they are ready to receive.
Yes.
And just like when we go into a networking room and we meet people, some of the people we meet are going to be ready and like excited to learn about our business or about the book we just wrote. And it's going to be the perfect timing for them to dive in and get that. Right. Yeah. Just like you talk to somebody about faith and they are the soil of their heart is fertile and they're ready and they're ready to hear the direct message of the gospel, which is why like Billy Graham and the evangelism crusades, like a lot of people became Christians. And I believe in some ways, those people, their hearts were ready to receive the gospel and the Holy Spirit worked. Other people that we meet in a networking room are just going to be like, cool, that was nice to meet you. Like, have a good day. And they're not going to even want to have another conversation with us. And so when it comes to evangelism, there's going to be people that are not in a place where they're ready to hear the gospel. And so I think this could be a whole separate episode. It really could be. At some point, we may want to talk about it, but I am very much in the camp. Again, as Holly and I were talking before we recorded, and I said, what did I say? The more I grow, the more I learn, I don't know, the older I get, all the things that make me sound really old, is that there is not just one right way to evangelize. There's not one right way to do a lot of things. And certain evangelism approaches work really well for certain people. And also based on your own gifts. Like your gifting, Holly, is different than my gifting. So the way we approach evangelism may be different based on our gifts. Yeah. And then the people that we interact with may receive it differently based on where they are at as individuals.
I guess that it just made me sort of think of sort of those people that kind of go out and do street evangelism. That's so not my gifting. And I've always felt guilty that that's not something that I could really do. And so it feels very formulaic. Is that a word? It's very formulaized.
Yeah. Formulaic is the right word.
Okay. Oh, good. And it feels so inauthentic to me. But so many people have come to the gospel and have come to faith in Jesus through that approach. And so I don't know, I guess I was just feeling as you were talking about it, I could just see so many similarities. Yeah. And I needed to get that out. So it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but maybe that's an episode in the future for us to talk about, because now my brain is spinning over that.
Well, I think it underlines the key concept that I think if you take nothing away from this conversation other than this, I think the thing to keep in mind for the networking and building relationships piece is it's about the other person.
Yes.
Keep it about them, not about you. Yeah. And in the same way, I think as if we are thinking about evangelism, when you are talking with someone, you have to, in my opinion, again, you have to figure out where the other person is at in their own faith journey in order to effectively communicate the gospel to them.
Yep.
So,
okay.
Well, I love tangent concluded. However, we will return in the future, especially if our listeners tell us that they like this conversation.
Okay.
If you're interested in this topic, please let us know. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Let's go back to what to do when you go to an event or you're in a virtual networking scenario. Yeah. Let's talk about that. You want to hit that one?
Yes. All right. So we're going to be talking about what to do at an event or in a virtual room. So event one-on-one in a group of couple people, you're trying to get to multiple different people, I guess, what it comes down to. So one of the things that has helped me is like, you have to get out of your own head. And I know I've said this on the last episode, and probably I'll talk about it a little bit more in this episode. But if you are concerned about your own self, your own insecurities, you have a certain, I need to get 5 leads out of all these conversations or this event. Like if you're so wound up about those types of things, it's going to be really hard to get out of your head and actually focus on the other person and listen to them. You got to try to eliminate whatever those things are that are taking up your brain space. So if you don't feel comfortable in your clothes, make sure you're wearing the right stuff that you feel confident in. If you are unsure of what to say, then maybe you want to practice a few things. If you're unsure of what you do, which is an okay place to be, but you still should know what to say. So kind of preemptively thinking about these things and having sort of prepared thoughts about them really helps you get out of your head and helps you get out of that formula or whatever you're going after as far as the way that you're networking. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing is to ask good questions, stay curious. So I feel like I'm an inquisitive person. So when I meet someone, I'm always asking good questions or trying to get to the sort of the next level. I think it's probably a personality thing. I really like to go deep with people. So for me, this kind of comes naturally, but if this does not come naturally to you, it's really about staying curious. So if they say, hey, I do this for a business or I have this type of ministry, a natural extension of that question is, well, how did you get into that? Or, you know what I mean? Like thinking about natural progressions of things or like more background things will help you ask good questions. And one of the main things about asking questions is avoid yes and no. We want open-ended questions. We want things that will lead to other places. And we want to be able to try to, it sounds weird to say like get things out of people, but some people have a hard time sharing. And so when you ask a question, they may give you short answers or not really elaborate. So it's your job to really pull it out of them.
Yeah. Can I add something on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think too, with asking questions is that if this is an area that you need to grow in, if you find yourself feeling stumped when you're meeting somebody and you're like, oh, what do I say? Like, and again, it's okay if that's where you're at. Then maybe coming up with like 3 or 4 starter questions that would be helpful in the context of where you're going to be. So again, if you're going to a ministry conference, if you're going to a business meeting, if you're going to, some sort of leadership development, whatever it is, like maybe asking 2 or having 2 or 3 questions in your back pocket on your phone in the notes app or something where it's like, okay, what's the biggest lesson you've learned in the past year about XYZ, like about the topic of the thing you're there? Right. Or what is one mistake you've made that you wish you would have done differently when you were starting out? Like, I don't know. I'm just throwing those out. Those might not be good questions, but but having a couple that you can just quickly refer to before a conversation or even in a conversation that might trigger your brain to start that curiosity trail. And the more you practice this, the more you will find it will come naturally to you.
Yeah, I think that kind of having those in the hopper ready to go is a good idea. Kind of keeping them top of mind. That way, when you're in the midst of the conversation, you don't have to like fish in your brain for something. Okay, so the next one is going to sound weird, especially if you're in a face-to-face, but take notes. So if you're in a virtual room, super easy to take notes because no one can really tell. Like that's kind of the whole point. But take notes. So an event I went to recently, there was a page that had each person's picture and name and then like lines underneath of it. And so after I talked to some people, I would go back to my notebook and write down like certain things about them so that when I went back to them again, or when I would follow up with them afterwards, I would remember those things from my notes. So a couple ways to do this, obviously, is if you're in a multi-day thing, then you will have the opportunity to walk away and like write things down. if you're only in like a 1 hour networking thing, you may want to just have your notes open in your phone and just kind of jot down a few things. But it's helpful to kind of remember these things later on. So if there are things that you think that you're going to forget, it would be helpful to take notes, which leads me into my next one. When someone says their name to you for the first time, so this is going to sound terrible, but I am so more interested in about them than their name. So I'm going to forget their name. So I try to say their name in the conversation 3 times after I meet them. That will cement their name and their face together in your brain. I don't always do it perfectly. I don't always do it well. I don't always get 3 times because sometimes it can be like, well, Esther, where are you from? Like sometimes it's awkward to like add a person's name, but forgetting someone's name is kind of a huge faux pas. But it's also okay to say, I'm not great with names. Like, and I've literally had people look at me after I've introduced myself to them, put their hand on my arm and said my name 3 times while looking at me. And they're like, this is just something I have to do to remember. And honestly, I don't care. They're making the effort to try to remember me and try to build a relationship with me. So come up with whatever trick you need to come up with to try to remember their name. Yeah. It's going to happen. You're going to forget someone's name, but it's okay to just say, I'm so sorry. I was so busy listening to your story that I forgot your name. Like I've literally said that to people.
Okay. Can I give like a little quick tip about this? Okay.
Yes, please.
2 things that have helped me at an event where there are name tags. You say, hey, can I take a picture of you with your name tag? And you just take a picture, you pull out your phone, you take a picture of the person with their name tag, right?
Awkward.
Then it's like, yeah, but they don't care. They're like,
I don't want you to take my picture if I just met you.
Well, this would be more like at the end of the conversation. If you're like, I don't want to forget this conversation. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't do it right at the beginning.
Okay. I'm like, if someone walked up to me and be like, can I take a picture of you and your name tag? No. Okay. After the conversation, I'm okay with.
After the conversation, if there's been some sort of reasonable level of connection, the other side of this that could be even more awkward if you don't like this, but like, hey, can we take a selfie together?
Yes.
And we take a selfie together and then I can jot down their name and say, took a selfie, and like, whatever, like, I find that if I have a photo of the person, I'm more likely to be able to recall when I'm looking at my notes who that person was.
Yeah.
And why we talked about XYZ.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I have one more tip about writing down notes. So if you have a workbook like what you had at your last event, that sounds amazing with the people's names. But most places, I've never seen that before at an event. So that was unique. A lot of times I will try to take a small notebook with me to an event. So just like a little, whatever, I don't know what size, but a smallish notebook where as I'm going and meeting people, I can easily jot down names and notes after I talk. So I'm not usually taking notes during the conversation with them, but right afterwards, if I go to that little notebook and I'll write their name and I'll write what they do and whatever. And then I'll also try to make a note if it's somebody I want to follow up with, if I want to send them an email or connect with them on Instagram or something like that.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned Instagram because the other thing I was going to say is sometimes I have literally said, hey, are you on Instagram? Or hey, are you on LinkedIn? Like, let's make a connection. Let's follow each other. And I will literally pull out my phone and go, okay, who are you? What are you? Is this you? And then click follow, like right there. And if there's been like a promise of information, so like, in other words, hey, I have this thing or whatever, I'll literally say, hey, I'm going to DM you right now so you know who I am. And I'll just say like, hey, Esther, and literally click send in a DM. So the DM is already started and we are already connected. So that's kind of the millennial way to do it.
Yes.
It's good. Old people take notes, but that's the other way.
I think you could do it both ways. And I think that the note taking is going to be more useful for when you get back and you're back to your office and you're like, okay, who do I need to follow up with? If you have taken notes, the Instagram connection or the DMs is more useful when you're actually in the conversation with them. Cause then they're like, oh, this isn't a complete stranger. Like I met you at XYZ conference.
Right. So in a virtual room, if you're doing a virtual room with a networking event, usually people will say, add your website, add your Instagram handle, add your something.
Yeah.
And it's like in a chat where everyone can get it. So that is kind of obvious. Like, we just recently did this in Uplift, and I had so many people that, well, not so many people. I had a handful of people from that who ended up following me, connecting with me on LinkedIn, and it was great.
That's awesome.
Which actually kind of covers the last point that we had, was don't walk away without some kind of way of connecting in the future, which is email, Instagram, whatever. So I skipped over one.
Okay.
But I think this is the crux of the whole conversation, is what value can I bring? So when you're in an event or you're at a virtual networking, whatever you want to say, it's about whatever value you can bring. So when I was first learning and starting to do this, I would only ask questions about other people, and I would only learn about them. And then they never learned anything about me, which was okay. I would kind of dominate the conversation, just digging in deep and figuring stuff out about them, because that's just who I am. But one of the things that I've learned to do is when they mention something that goes along with either an experience I've had or any type of value I can bring, it's at that point that I say, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you mentioned that or whatever, because this is actually something that I've done, da, 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 da. Like, it's okay in the natural course of the conversation to enter in an experience, a story, something that you've done in the past. Like I mentioned, was it in the last episode? I think I mentioned I met someone who was trying to get out of her 9-to-5 and build a business. And I was able to give her that value about like the experience that I had with helping other people or talking to other people about how to do that. In the past, I would have just asked her more and more questions. Whereas in this case, I was like, hey, I have some experience with this. Can I tell you a couple of things that I know about this? This is a little bit about what I do. And here's a couple of things that have been useful for other people, blah, 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 blah. So don't forget that when you are asking questions with people, that can lead directly into your value.
Yeah.
But don't forget to then ask another question.
Mm-hmm.
So I was basically like, have you thought about this? What's your timeline? What's holding you back? Like, all those types of questions really helped me show my value and also convey the experience or skill that I have. And I will say that I've heard lots of people say that you can tell the depth of knowledge or the depth of value that someone can bring based on the questions that they ask. So asking really good questions is really important. I don't want to belabor that because I know we've talked about that a lot, but based on what you're asking, people can tell how much you actually know about things. So that all makes sense.
It does. It's so good. And it leads right into the next point, which is what to do when someone asks about you.
Right.
So we've talked about kind of the general guidelines of what to do at an event or in a virtual room, some of the principles. So hopefully in the course of a conversation, if you're meeting somebody, you've asked them a few questions, you're learning about them. Usually they are going to turn around and say, well, what about you, Holly? Tell me a little bit about yourself. And that is your opportunity to share something about yourself. And so in the business world, we call it your elevator pitch. It could be an introduction. It could be, what are some of the other terms that we use? I forget. They're all leaving me, but your
I help
statement. Yeah. There's lots of ways to phrase it.
Yeah.
In the non-business world, it's just like basically introduce yourself. Like,
right.
So this is where you can share. And we have a list of questions that you can ask yourself to create this introduction. Mm-hmm. And, like I said, in the last episode, I used to be part of BNI. That's Business Networking International. And BNI does something unique. They really help people introduce themselves. And the whole focus of the introduction is to focus on who would be a good referral for you, because that's the whole point of the organization, is to refer business to each other. So I like that philosophy because it takes the focus off of me looking at you, Holly, as my next potential client, and instead me looking at you as someone who might know someone who could be my potential client.
I like that.
So that again takes it and makes it a little bit less like a sales pitch and more like a true, like, this is who I am and what I do and how I help people. So here's the questions you can ask. Who am I? Okay. We're not going to go like, this is not like the life question. Who am I? This is just like, I am Esther Littlefield. What do I do or sell? What do I sell? What do I do? Again, if you are a ministry leader, a church staff person, whatever it is, like, you can introduce yourself with what you do or what kind of work you do. Who do I serve or who do I work with? So that can be part of your introduction. I work with Christian women who are building businesses online.
Yeah.
That's an easy way to answer that. What action do I want people to take after meeting me? So think through, what is it that you want to point them towards? What is it that you have that might benefit them? Again, you might say something like, I have a free resource called the Ideal Life and Business Guide that helps people figure out what kind of business they want to build based around their ideal life.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that, right? And then who or what am I looking for? And again, this would be where you could use that referral piece. You could say something like, the best kind of referral for me, my favorite type of client to work with is da 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 da. And if you know someone who might fit that, whatever, you can throw that in there. If in the context of the conversation, you need to figure out what works. So again, with this introduction, elevator pitch, whatever it is, you want to set yourself apart, if you can, from what everybody else in the room is doing. Like, for example, if you're at a podcasting conference, like, everybody there is a podcaster. So you've got to find a way to make your podcast sound unique or different or directly appeal to the right type of listener. But then the other thing is that you want to practice it and say it a few times so that when you have that chance. And it's that whole thing that, people really do judge based on a quick snippet of information.
Yeah.
And if you can say this in a way that is interesting and it creates curiosity and it's clear, that's going to help people be curious and want to know more about you, versus if you ramble too long about yourself or if you just give them all the details of what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They are going to stop listening.
Okay. As I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about all the different types of listeners that we have. So this makes a lot of sense for a business person.
Yeah.
It makes sense for someone that's in like a parachurch ministry, because oftentimes you're trying to raise money or da-da-da. If you are a leader in a church, you're a director, you're a pastor, whatever you are, how does this translate for them? Like, where are they going to be where they're going to use this? Because I think a lot of times when you think about a pastor or a leader in a church, they're often building relationships with parishioners, whatever you want to call them, people who come to their church, right?
Right.
But maybe this is in the context of a pastor or leader at an event where other pastors or leaders are.
That's what I would be thinking about. Yeah.
Okay. So, but what I get not what do you sell? But like, I'm Esther, I'm a director at this church. Who do you serve and work with? Do you help me translate this for the person that is a church leader? Because I think that it's a little bit more not obvious.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pretend women's ministry director.
Yeah, sure.
Say something like that. Right. So I'm the women's ministry director at XYZ church. And I love working with the women in our local community to help them have a deeper relationship with Christ and to also build lifelong connections and friendships with other women in their community. If you know a woman who is feeling lonely and doesn't have connection in her life right now, I would love to have you send her to our next event that's happening on May 15th.
Right.
I don't know. Like that's, I mean, I think something like that would be how you could incorporate that.
I love it. I don't know. I just felt less obvious to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think you have to finesse this and you have to use obviously some like practice based on your unique scenario. You know, if you are just like, I keep saying this and it sounds horrible, but like, if you're just like a regular person, like if you don't have like a title or a role, you know what I mean? I guess I'm just mean like, if you are a mom who occasionally volunteers, but you don't have a title or a role, but you help out at your kid's school and you lead a small group at your church, like your introduction is going to be different than someone who's got like the CEO of a business or whatever.
Right.
But it's still, you can still incorporate some of these things and you
there's
can
still
also
value there. Like you know things and you have value to offer people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if I was the only dense one that wasn't.
Well, no, I think that probably listeners were feeling the same thing or wondering the same thing. So,
okay. So I think this is great. I think this kind of gets, I don't know if you've been in this situation, but when someone asks you something at one of these events, like I've literally paused and then like, I don't know what my name is and I don't know what I do anymore. So I think this is really important. And I want to brag on you, Esther. I don't know if you remember, we went to an event together.
Yeah.
And we were registering. And
I remember this.
Yes.
It was PodFest.
And the person at the registering said something like, "What do you do?" Yeah. And you had like 1 or 2 sentences. You knew exactly who you helped. You knew exactly what you did. And they were so impressed. And I was like, that's my friend.
I think they were like, you're the only person that has been able to answer that in such a short synopsis.
Like succinct way. Like you knew exactly what to say. I was so impressed. I'll never forget that, Esther. I was like, I know her.
I think, again, it's really, it all goes back to thinking about who you're talking to. And
yes,
when I am receiving information, like if you don't know Holly and she comes and introduces herself and starts to explain how she goes into her client's QuickBooks and reconciles transactions and looks at the flow of cash from one month to the next and analyzes and creates spread, like your eyes are going to glaze over.
Yeah.
Right. If Holly introduced herself that way. But if she said, I help my clients keep more of their money in their business and be able to give generously and live the lifestyle that they want to live, like, well, now you've got me interested.
Right.
Right. So it's like figuring out the language to use that gets somebody interested and not bored.
Well, and too, like if I was at a QuickBooks conference, maybe that makes a lot more sense.
Exactly.
But if I am at Walmart, you know what I mean? Or like, that's probably not a good example, but you know, I'm at like some in-town networking event
or
like
even an
local
event at
chamber of
church.
commerce. I'm not going to be like, well,
let me tell you what my weekly schedule looks like when I open up my clients' accounts. Well, and I say that because, again, going back to the BNI experience, there were a lot of people in BNI who struggled with this because they wanted to tell people about what they did, like the actual things that they did, instead of focusing on like the results that they would help people get or the way that their clients or customers' lives were better when they worked with them. And so again, it's just a lot of practice and thinking through when I introduce myself, how am I coming across to somebody who knows nothing about this topic?
Yeah.
So,
okay. We are going to talk about what to watch for, things that you want to avoid and not do.
Yes.
Don't do
these things.
Don't do these things. So I might need help explaining the first one.
Okay.
So the first one is upspeak. So this is something we got from our good friend Karen Laus. She coaches women on how to speak confidently. And so one of the things that we don't even realize that we do is when someone says, "What's your name?" or "Introduce yourself," you say something like, "My name is Holly Kane." And it sounds like I am like putting a question mark at the end of that.
Right.
The upspeak makes me sound uncertain.
Yeah.
So I am really bad at this because it's really hard for me to be like, I am Holly Kane. That sounds so robotic, but right. So coming down on that or speaking confidently, like you actually know who you are is important. So upspeak is something that once you hear it, you almost can never unhear it. Yeah. But until you are told about it, you have no idea it exists.
Yes, exactly.
And so we have our friend Karen to thank for that. But
and we have an episode with her. I actually can't remember if it's on the leadership podcast or the business podcast, but either way.
I don't remember having her on leadership.
Well, I know that she hasn't been on with both of us, but I may have aired her episode on the leadership podcast. But either way, we will link her episode, one of her conversations on the podcast. Yes. We'll link it up. But yes, it is like, I'm Esther Littlefield.
Yeah.
Like, and see how it sounded like instead of I'm Esther Littlefield.
Yeah.
So
you do that way better than I
do. But again, you don't notice it. And so again, it's just one of those like little things that if you change that one thing, you will sound more confident when you are introducing yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. The next thing that you want to not do is rambling.
Like something we try not to do on the podcast, but
it's we definitely take what we do on the podcast and do the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, and again, this is a different format. Yes. And this is our platform, so we can do whatever we want. But in a networking context,
yes,
being aware, and this is really something that I think people have different levels of awareness of how long they have been talking, but sometimes it might be, this is why practicing is good. Pull out your phone, set a timer for 30 seconds or a minute, and try to say your introduction in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in BNI, it had to be 60 seconds or less, and the bell went off at 60 seconds. And part of that is because there's a certain number of people in the room, and in order for everybody to get a turn, you need to be on time. And so with that, you know, even in a virtual setting, it is very easy to sort of just keep talking.
Yeah.
Because you've got a room full of people that are listening. It's not the same as when you're face to face with somebody. You can kind of start to sense if there's like body language that's showing that they're getting bored or they're ready to walk away. But in a virtual room, you don't necessarily notice that. So again, practice saying your introduction or kind of summarizing what you do in a concise way that creates curiosity, but that doesn't go into the rambling category. I want to say category, but that's not the word I want. But anyway.
Well, as I'm thinking about this, it makes me think that like if I was to kind of define rambling, it's just saying words that don't really mean anything. Like you're not actually making a point. You're not actually getting anywhere. And so I think that when we say watch out for rambling, I think it's doing your best to be succinct and impactful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes rambling is also saying the same thing that you already said
over and over again,
you know, like multiple times.
Yeah.
And so again, taking a tip from Karen Laus, we're just going to keep taking her tips. She teaches people to say, and my point is,
right.
Like if you find yourself rambling, you just wrap it up by saying, and my point is, and that will help you bring it back to an ending point of the conversation.
I'm a repeater. I repeat myself lots of times.
It's so easy to do. And again, this is not like, we're not here to be like, everybody is horrible. I mean, I've done this myself many times. I mean, sometimes I get onto a podcast interview and they ask me to introduce myself and I completely stumble over my words, you know, and so it's ridiculous. So we all have room to grow.
Oh, absolutely.
And the more you practice, the more you will start to realize, okay, this is what will be the most effective way to interact with somebody.
Right. Okay. The next thing to watch out for is selling too quickly. And I think this leads right into, or refers right back to, I should say, your example about the Christmas party. Mm-hmm. Like if you're walking in and, you know, the first person you meet, you sort of open your jacket and you got all your watches for sale. Like that's probably not appropriate. or good timing. So I think that this again comes back to offering value. And if it makes sense to say, I have a product or I have a service or, I have a ministry that can help blah, 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 whatever, whatever the problem is, that's okay.
Yeah.
But going into the actual sales pitch or reciting your sales page or, going into your 5 program points might not be appropriate. So selling too quickly is probably one of the biggest things you can do to have someone throw up a wall and not ever become your client, your customer, your
even someone who would refer people to you. They're not going to refer people to you if they think that the person I refer is going to get pitched in the first conversation.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
So be careful about that. And again, selling is service, but also shoving it down people's throats is not really the best way to go about it. So,
okay. So lastly, don't do this, talking about yourself too much.
I've done this.
Oh,
and I cringed as I realized I was doing it.
Again, it can happen. It can happen. But when you realize it, you turn it around and try to ask a question.
Yes.
Take the focus off yourself, switch it up, pitch it to the other person. I have found that this is more likely to happen if I am asking the other person questions and I am getting one-word answers. And I'm like, it's like pulling teeth and I can't really get anywhere. Then I might just I don't know, start talking. But if someone asks you a question and you have a brief story that relates to it or a brief thing that about how you could help them, great, do that. But then turn it around, ask a question back to them. That is the best way to keep the conversation going in a direction that's not gonna feel awkward to people. So
and people's favorite topic is to talk about themselves. So you want to try to get them talking about themselves, not so much about you talking about yourself. So, and usually people don't mind sharing about themselves. I guess it's just when they haven't talked for a long time, it's probably time to turn it around.
And sometimes it's time to end the conversation. It's okay to say, okay, well, I'm going to go, chat with this group over here. Like I have been in some of those situations where it's just 2 people, just me and one other person. And it's kind of like nothing else is going to come of this conversation.
Yes.
And you do have to politely disengage, and that's okay too. Don't feel like you're locked into a conversation if you're not getting any kind of connection with the other person.
So I want to go deeper in that. Okay. How do you politely disengage? Do you have any examples about how you've done it before? I mean, I know I can say one that I have said, I've enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for telling me about XYZ.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch base with this other person. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But
I think that's a great way.
It's awkward. It can be so awkward.
It can be awkward, but I also think it's normal. It's normal in this kind of situation. Okay. And I would say, I'm trying to think of a good example. I can think of an example where I was trapped in a conversation.
Oh, no.
And I couldn't disengage.
Yeah.
But I did finally at one point say, well, it was more in a faith-oriented conversation. I just kind of had to say, I really believe God will be working if you just continue to, trust him and to move forward. But the person had kind of repeated their story to me multiple times. And it was kind of there was nothing more that I felt like I could give of value. And I could tell that there were other people that were wanting to potentially connect with me. And so I had to kind of gracefully say, really pray that God will lead you and, but that I had to say that more than one time to kind of try to give the hint that we were going to wrap up.
But I think context here is really important too. Yeah. If you're after church and you're someone's talking to you about a problem that they're having, That's very different than the purpose that we're talking about. Like, this is about like networking and relationship building in a kind of event scenario, not like, you know, my marriage is falling apart and I need to talk about it type of situation, you know. So I think it's important to remember context too.
Yes.
Anyway. All right. I think we did it.
We did it. All right. Yeah. Hopefully we've got some good tips on building relationships, networking in person, in virtual settings. I just thought of one more thing though, that I have to say.
Lay it on us.
Well, this would be for the virtual setting.
Okay.
And again, it would be in the context of not selling too quickly. It's like you are in a Facebook group and you connect with somebody and you see that they maybe do have a need for a thing that you can do.
Yeah.
And you immediately DM them, pitching them on the thing that you offer. Right. And so again, that is the virtual version of pitching them on your stuff right in the first interaction.
Yeah.
90% of the time, that is not a good idea. The only time it might be an okay idea is if they have already specifically said, hey, can you send me the information on what you do? Like, I'd like to know more.
Okay. So are you ready for our fun question?
Well, I think so. I don't know. Am I?
I'm afraid to give my answer to this question. Are you?
Slightly. No? I've already been identified. I've already been called out for it. So it's okay. I'm used to it.
Okay. Ready? So what weird podcast are you listening to right now?
Okay. So we specified weird podcast because we assume that you and I are listening to some normal podcasts or beneficial podcasts in our lives.
Yes.
Mostly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So the weird... The one that I've been listening to that I just binged and I have run out of episodes of is Counterclock. So it is a crime podcast. Okay. This is my latest thing. I am into cults and crime. So I've been listening to podcasts about cults and I've been listening to podcasts about crime. And I don't fully know why, but I have a theory.
Oh, okay. I need to hear this because I don't know why I'm doing this either.
I have a two-part theory. One part of my theory is that in my current real life situation, I have a lot going on and there's a lot of stress in the moment. And sometimes a podcast that is just like so far-fetched from my life and not like something I have to learn and apply. It's more... I'm going to say relaxing, but that's a very weird term for a crime podcast. But it's just my brain is using a different part. It's using a different part of my brain versus the podcasts that are all amazing that I love that are about leadership and faith and business. And like, I still have those. Yeah. But I have been binging the Counterclock podcast and it is about cold cases and it is well done. And here's the second theory that I think is probably even stronger than the first theory. Okay. Some of these podcasts, I'm going to say some because not all of the ones that I have listened to do this, but a lot of them with crime and cult topics do a really good job of storytelling. Yes. So they get you in with the story and from one episode to the next, similar to a TV series that's done well, you are like hooked at the end to be like, I need to listen to the next episode to figure out what is going to happen. Yes. Right. So it's the story element of the podcast that intrigues me. Along with, of course, it being like kind of a mystery and something that I'm trying to figure out what I think about what happened. And similarly, the cult podcasts sometimes do the same thing where it's someone's story about how they got into a cult, how they got out of the cult, what happened when they were in the cult. And those kind of stories also intrigue me. Yeah.
I've gone down the sort of cult road as far as documentaries, but I haven't gotten into the cults in podcasts. So I need to do that. But Yeah, I'm right there with you with the true crime.
Okay. Here we are. We're both weird true crime podcast junkies now.
So I want to say the two true crime ones I've been listening to, or I have listened to. So number 1 is Crime Junkie.
Okay.
And number 2 is The Deck Investigates. Mm-hmm. So The Deck Investigates is a whole season on one crime, one cold case. And then the Crime Junkie is a new crime every episode. The reason I like these is because you're exactly right. It's the storytelling, and it is how they are keeping you kind of in the story. And then it's almost like, and then this like next thing happened, and you'll never believe like what the next thing is. But part of the reason I like these is because they're not gruesome. Like the way that they describe the crimes that have happened, and they're terrible crimes, but like they're not gruesome about it. And the whole point is to have these stories brought to light. They're cold cases. And so it's about justice. It's about bringing closure to families. It's about changing maybe how laws are written. Like there is a purpose behind it. And I can really get on board with that. Like, sign this petition to have this case open so that blah, 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 blah. Or, you know what I mean? Like, while the story is good and I find it so intriguing, I also really appreciate the fact that it is trying to bring relief, closure, whatever, to families that have gone through these things. So for me, even though it is sad and like some of the crimes are terrible, there's a purpose behind it, I guess.
Yeah.
And I can totally get on board with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think the same thing with the ones I have listened to is the goal is to tell the story so that more people know about the different events. And if they hear something that sounds familiar, that they could call and report a tip or give, information about something,
right,
to be able to provide some level of closure for the victims of what happened. So, yeah.
I'm just looking because there's another one. Okay. Can I tell you about a really random one I haven't listened to in a little while? Okay. This is not crime, nor is it cult. It's called The Great Indoors.
Okay.
And it is 2 British ladies who talk about interior design. And oh my gosh, they had an entire segment just on the color yellow.
Wow. Okay. There was a weird one. That's amazing.
And I was so like, oh my gosh, like literally. So I kind of came in, I haven't listened to all of them or anything like that. And, one of the ladies is like, well, you know how I feel about yellow. And like, and of course with their accents and everything. And it's just so adorable. So I think probably that and the other ones that we're talking about, I agree. It's like an escape from what you're doing. Like, there's nothing required of me. And I can engage my like curious brain in a way that requires no action from me afterwards. I can just think about deep thoughts and like cool scenarios. And then I can just go about my day and have to worry about like groceries and meal planning and all that jazz. Another time. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Okay. Well, I think we have sufficiently, tackled that topic and many other subtopics along the way. So
yes,
thank you, friend, for listening today. And we're coming up. If you're listening to this in real time, and if this episode goes out when I'm planning for it to go out, which is all maybe, I don't know, like not definite at this point.
I love that.
But we are coming up on our 5-year anniversary of podcast very soon. So
that's crazy. There's no way that's real. Well, that can't be real.
We'll have to take some time to process.
That's the first time I was still getting used to the word 4 years. Like I was still getting used to 4. So the fact that you said we're coming up on 5 really like blew my brain.
Well, we July'd it. We launched it.
I know. In July.
Oh man.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Hopefully we will be in a better space in the next time that we record. Although I will be most likely in a different physical space.
You will. That'll be exciting.
I will not be in my current office.
No, you won't.
Hopefully I'm going to have a place to record.
You will. You will. Remember at the very beginning when we both recorded in our closet?
Yes, that's true. Yep.
We
could do that again if I need to.
That was very beginning. Those are the good old days.
All right, friend. Okay. Thank you for being here today. Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast. And it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this, and thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.